Hey guys, this is Jeff Sparks of Between Paint and welcome to a new video tutorial. In this video today we're going to walk through a critique I recently did for an artist. One of the things that I offer to artists is a master critique service. Though I won't go into the details here about the master critique details, I hope you'll stop by my website and check it out. It's only $10, and for that I provide to you, the artist, a visually rich and informative teaching critique. What you're going to see today in the video is in fact the critique for $10 that I sent to the artist. It's actually quite a deal. But with that artist's permission, I was able to go ahead and take her critique and turn it into a video for all of our benefits. So her name's Linda, and I'm really happy that Linda allowed me to do that. Well, as you know, everything about my videos here have to do with one thing, and that is how to make your painting captivating. That is, a person walks into a gallery, they walk by a lot of paintings. I want your painting to be the one they stop at because something about that painting of yours draws them in. It's captivating. And so even in my critiques with an artist, that's what we work on. And so when I have an artist approach me to do one of these critiques, the first thing I want to know is what the artist is thinking about. What are her parameters? As Linda indicated here, she felt something wasn't working but just didn't quite know what. Well, that's a perfect time for a critique. And my thought or response to that is my first initial impression about her painting. And that's what I sort of listed here for her. Obviously, I want to look at things before I research them and what's my immediate feeling about this painting. What would I be thinking about it? And is it captivating, or can it be made to be captivating? I also asked the artist if by chance they're using reference photos. Go ahead and send those too, because how we interpret photo reference is often very essential in how we create a more finished, a more excellent piece of work. I take those initial ideas that I had originally, that was first impressions, and I begin to expand them into a basic overview of what I think we can accomplish in this critique. What could be accomplished in this painting that Linda has called Ram Band Trio. I'll share them with you. If you look at the top photo there, you'll see three odd geometric shapes in different colors. The top left one is blue, and that shape indicates that I felt there was an assortment of shapes that were competing with one another, including the subject of the ram, and I felt that they were losing themselves into one another and creating shape disorientation. To the right, there is a red shape that points out what I felt was the start of a different painting altogether. And by that I mean I see blue painted in the shadows of these rocks, and yet that blue does not take place in the shadows of the rams. And so there's two different shadow paradigms going on, and that began to split the painting. And the light purple shade at the bottom indicates that I believe the key to this entire painting is this ram right here in the foreground. It's the most important shape, the painting, and may very well be the key. Now, I'll explain all of this in detail shortly. The second image below that, this is showing what elements are in a painting that I think are creating or could create more depth if we handle them a little bit differently. So in the foreground, you can see the ram as she presented it, but I put these little transparent orbs of gray over the middle ram, and then a darker one over the back ram in the distance. And already that begins to tell me I think we can improve our visual depth by maybe changing the values of this painting as we move back. So that's what we're looking at. That's my overview. And now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of it. And we're going to start right away with just talking about depth. Sometimes, whether it's working in acrylic paint, but often in oil paint as well, building depth in a painting can be rather difficult. If all the other elements are working right, but we somehow don't get the depth right, then the painting begins to look really flat. Now, in a painting, if everything is sharp and crystal clear, the depth of that painting begins to erode, and so it becomes very flat. So, by all means, use photography and manipulate the heck out of it, but never copy from a photograph because it begins to eliminate your depth. It's only to say that if you arrive at that because of photography alone, then you're going to really struggle with the issues of depth throughout your painting. So, on the screen, I'm calling this larger, less, and little. The arrow pointing to the first shape at the bottom should be brighter, more detailed. And that begins to pop it out to us. And so on, as the image works itself back into the distance, the masses become smaller and a little darker. And I indicate that by wrapping each of these figures with this abstract form and coloring that form a certain shade of gray. In the beginning, the larger, brighter abstract form is definitely going to stand out the most. You move that back, that abstract form is a little darker, and the third one is darker yet. So instantly, these three abstract forms begin to move back in space, and that begins to tell me that there's real power in this painting waiting to happen if we just adjust those things a little bit. So larger, less, and little. But let me ask you a question. Do other artists do this? Is this something found in all captivating work? That's a good question, because I don't want anything I say in these tutorials or in my critiques to be my ideas alone. So let's turn to one master painting by Thomas Eakins that really exhibits this feature. So he's using the elements of larger, less, and little in this painting. It's one of his most famous paintings. And all masters utilize this tool of depth. Here in Eakins' painting, in the foreground, the most detail and brightest values are present where the surgery is taking place. To the left of this surgery team is one figure a little less bright, a lot less bright actually, but not quite as non-distinct as all of those other characters in the back. Larger elements in that surgical team, look at how bright it is and how much, if there is color, and Thomas Eakins does not use a lot of color often, but here you have the most detail. Move to the left, a little less detail, and then you move into this audience in the background sitting in the round, and these guys back here, they're barely just smudges of brown in three different values. Very nondescript, no detail, not a lot of value difference. So you can see here how Thomas Eakins, and really any master artist, applies this element of depth. And that's all we want to talk about with Linda and her painting, is just by increasing the value to make it darker as you move farther back in this case will really help and assist with the painting. The next point that I turn my attention to in this critique is how to unify the elements of a painting when they begin to dissolve and merge one into the other. If we look to the next slide here, you'll see some interesting things going on. Let me explain that a moment. When I do a critique, it's not enough for me to tell the artist what I'm thinking. For me, it's essential that I show the artist what I'm thinking and also how to come up with the same results. And so here the difficulty is using the artist's painting in such a way that I can communicate these ideas with clarity. What I did here is I took her original painting, I desaturated or made it into grayscale, and I took it into Photoshop and posterized it, which allowed only three values to come forward. I began using in Photoshop what they call a color picker, just an eyedropper to grab the right color, and I took a brush and began brushing over all of this detail that's found in the midground and background, and that helped unify all of those elements. And then gently I would take a virtual eraser and tease out some of those highlights. It's starting to unify all of the masses just a little bit better. So that's what you're seeing here. But you're also seeing something else going on here too. Linda had great composition, and I think some of her composition was getting compromised because the elements were merging together. So as I thought about it, I thought to myself, well, where could I turn to help illustrate what I'm trying to show Linda? But all it does is communicate the point that when you begin to unify the elements by making them connected in the same value, it begins to tie the painting together. The previous slides, if we go ahead and keep each element at a different value, we can retain our depth. So retaining depth and connecting all of those various values, well, our painting begins to really become captivating. And I think you can really see that here. We're on the right path at any rate. However, is it working? And that's the key here. So I've turned to the next slide, and I'm going to take my graphic novel-like rendering of her values connect it to her original painting, and what do you think it will look like? Well, let's see. In fact, when I did this, I didn't know what the results would be either, but I thought they were pretty favorable. Here to the bottom left, you see those two paintings combined, and it looks pretty strong. Although the original colors appear a bit washed out, that's only due to the transparency of the photos and how I'm using them online. What strikes me is how much more captivating and visual this painting has become just by walking through this simple process, just by unifying the values and downplaying some of that excess detail. Now, I realize this is much easier to do on a computer, and I'm using Photoshop CS6. The tools are very present there, but it's not any harder to do that with in your studio with oil paint. So even though on screen it's going to be a little bit different how you make this work on your easel, at your easel, still the power speaks for itself to what this does. It can really transform your painting when you begin to connect values and downplay some excess detail and really help this painting pop out. But when you talk about values, you have to instantly talk about edges, and that's where we're going to turn to next in this critique. This is a foundational skill for artists. We must have some control over our edges. In fact, we should have total control over our edges. If an artist does not purposely examine all edges in a painting, it'll be a problem almost automatically. Sometimes it can be a chore. Sometimes I don't actually like having to think through all of that. I just want to paint. But I have found that the time and effort we do take to pay attention to our edges and our edge control, it's been one of the best returns on my investment in a painting ever. Edges always are what skilled judges are examining in a juried show. Edges can be hard, they can be soft, lost and found. There's many ways to do that, but in general, an edge is always, again, where two shapes of different values meet. Now, that's so important because if we're talking about depth and building depth and distinction in a painting, wherever your focal point is or your focal area, you're going to have the greatest contrast of value in that area. You have to, or else your eyes would be drawn to some other less important part of the painting. And here, let me take a moment to correct a widespread myth. In your focal area, it is not about having your lightest light and your darkest dark. That's not correct. I mean, it can be true in some paintings, but what is more accurate is to say that while it can be your lightest light and darkest dark in your focal area, it's always the greatest distance between those values and those value shapes that make your focal area pop. And so if you look at the screen here, these four set pairs of swatches of value, it's a test. Which should be placed in the focal area? In other words, if you were to look, what has the greatest distance between them? Is it number one? You see white and some kind of a gray there. Well, does that have more distance? Does number two? Does number three? Does number four? So pause this video a moment if you want. Take this test. Pick out the one that has the greatest distance in value between one and the other, and then come back in and we'll see what you have. Well, if you pick number two, congratulations. Whether we have white or whether we have black or any other value in between, in these sets, the one with the greatest distance between each value up there is set number two. Hard to imagine, isn't it? But you have a really light gray, light mid-gray, and a dark mid-gray, and the distance in steps between those exceeds the distance in all of these others. And all your values should be established before you begin your painting. If you have a focal area and you're going to have the largest value range, that needs to be planned out in advance. The moment that it's settled, you must do a very difficult thing. Not allow there to be a greater value range happening any other place in your painting. So, is it a rule? No, it's only an awareness, but keep your greatest value difference inside your focal area, and more often than not, you're going to be going in the right direction. Another way of looking at it is that if the RAM in this photo here is our focal area, then we put this little highlight around the other two RAMs, roughly the middle and background of this painting. And nowhere inside of that highlighted area or that demarked area should value difference or edges or detail be greater than that which is at the front. And that is one element to a very powerful painting. And I just wanted to show you that right there. Now, I need to say a quick word on color, not because Linda has any problems with it. In fact, it's the opposite of why I want to bring that up. The idea that I want to pass on is really an awareness, again, about what to be careful about in a painting. One of the things that can kill a lot of depth and dimension is using white. You know, I've thought about how to present this to others before, and I've often said, especially if you're an oil painter, the most dangerous thing in your studio is not your flammable cleaners or your odorless mineral spirits or burning candles or any of that. The most dangerous thing to your work is a tube of white paint. Whether you're painting in oils or acrylics, white is the leading cause of problems within value and color in almost every painting that has problems. Here's what I would like you to do. If you ever look at your painting and something just isn't reading, and you, especially if you get this chalky feel to it, I want you to take your white tube of paint, put them in a box, take it to a different room, and use in your studio only colors. Use them thin, transparent, and loose. Do all of that for as long as you can. Then take your painting with just those colors as far as it can go, its farthest point of completion possible. And then when you can push it no further, stop. Go ahead and take a photo of your painting so you can mark where you're at, and then go to bed. Leave your painting alone for 24 hours. Come back to it the next day and now bring your tube of white paint. You're going to notice something shocking, that your painting probably doesn't need it or doesn't need it very much. So anyway, those are just some ideas about color here at the very tail end of this critique that I wanted to pass on to the artist. And so I'll pass them on to you as well. Always be careful about using white, and instead use colors that are thinned to develop all of your masses and values and so on, and then bring white out only at the end or only toward the end when you absolutely must have it to make the painting work. So I hope you found this critique to be helpful. I love doing them and sharing them with you. So if you've learned anything from how I've worked with this other artist, then everything, it's worth it. It's awesome. Thank you for that. The entire video critique, though, can be found on my website in the form of a PDF. I've taken this critique, put it into a PDF, and if you go to my website, click on links and other stuff, and you're going to see that sitting there. Feel free to download a free copy of it. It's free to you. Happy to do that. So let me take this opportunity to invite you one more time. If you yourself have a painting you would like to submit for critique, go ahead and let me do it. It's also on my website, and I hope you'll check it out. Until next time, this is Jeff Sparks from Between Paint.